Welcome to another episode of the Brett Snodgrass Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. I am the host of this podcast, and today I have a very special guest. Before I get into introducing him, go over to the Brett Snodgrass channel on YouTube and subscribe. Also, ring that bell so you get all the notifications that come out each week with all of our new videos. Today, guys, I have the one and only Dr. Gary Chapman. He is the author of the 5 Love Languages book that has sold more than 15 million copies worldwide. Also, on the 5lovelanguages.com, if you take the 5 Love Languages test, 60 million people have taken this personality test. He's also the senior pastor at the Calvary Baptist Church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He's celebrating 50 years on staff. He's a radio host, a husband, a father, and today he's talking to us about how you can use the 5 love languages. Let me introduce you to Dr. Gary Chapman.
Well, thank you, Brett. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this podcast, just meeting you face to face. As I mentioned before this show, the 5 love languages has been instrumental to my marriage, to my business, to my kids, to my family, and we're always talking about, what is your love language, or, how do you like to receive love? And it's just a common thing that we bring up a lot. And I know you're the author of the 5 love languages. You wrote that book, I believe, in the 90s. Is that right?
Yeah, 92, I think, is when it came out originally.
Yeah, that's amazing. So many decades later. And I just want to kind of start there. So a lot of our listeners might not have heard of the book of the 5 love languages. So, how did you kind of come up with that idea? Where did it come from? And let's talk about that.
Brett, it grew out of my counseling. They would sit in my office, and marriage counseling is what I've done through the years. And one of them would say, I just feel like my spouse doesn't love me. And the other one would say, I don't understand that. I do everything I can to show you that I love you. I do this and this and this and this. How could you say that I don't love you? So I realized that people were sincere, but they were missing each other emotionally. And eventually I took time to sit down. I said to myself, there's got to be a pattern to this. And I sat down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and asked myself the question, when someone sat in my office and said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages. And I've started using that in my counseling. If you want her to feel love, you got to learn how to express love in her love language. If you want him to feel love, you've got to learn his language. And I would help people discover their love language, challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes they would come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is changing everything. The whole climate's different now. And then I used it with small groups, and the same thing would happen. Probably 5 years later, I thought, if I could put this concept in a book, write it in the language of the common person, maybe I could help a lot of couples that I would never have time to see in my office. Little did I know, of course, the book would sell now over 15 million copies in English and be translated and published in over 50 languages around the world. So it's been amazing to see how that book has helped so many couples learn how to meet the deep emotional need of love.
Yeah, that is an amazing story, and I love how you were using this in your practice kind of before the book came about, and you were seeing the results of it as well, seeing really marriages be repaired and restored. And let's just talk about kind of the languages, because I think that's just kind of an amazing, really grabs your attention, is because I just got back from a trip from Guatemala, so I do some missions down in Guatemala, and we were at an orphanage, and I love serving the orphans there and serving the communities around there. But one thing that keeps coming back during that is people say, I love it here and I love serving, but I have a hard time communicating with the orphans because I don't speak their language.
Yeah.
And you really related that to relationships and to love. So talk to us about that, and let's just dig into the 5 love languages and what they are.
Yeah, I did use that concept because my background before I studied counseling was anthropology, cultural anthropology. So I was deeply, engrossed in the fact that cultures have different languages and different customs and all that sort of thing. So that concept, if I speak only English and the other person speaks only Chinese or Spanish or whatever, we can both be talking, but neither one of us are understanding the other person.
Right.
And that's exactly what I saw in marriages, that we were both speaking in our minds, we were loving each other, but we weren't communicating. It wasn't coming through. So I think that concept, it is very similar to spoken language. And the five languages, if you want to get into that right now, I can briefly share those, okay?
Yeah, that would sound great.
And these are in no particular order of importance. But one would be words of affirmation, using words to affirm the other person. You look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. You know, one of the things I like about you, it's simply using words to affirm the other person. You know, there's an ancient Hebrew proverb that says life and death is in the tongue. We can kill people or give them life by the way we talk to them. So words of affirmation, for some people, this is their language. And if they don't get words of affirmation, they won't feel loved, no matter what you're doing. And then a second love language is acts of service, doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. Now, in marriage, that is such things as cooking meals, washing dishes, vacuuming floors, washing the car, mowing the grass, walking the dog, changing the baby's diaper. Ooh, that's a big one. You know, there's an old saying, Brett, actions speak louder than words. If this is your love language, that's true. It's not true for everyone, but if this is your love language, actions will speak louder than words. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got from me. And the gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. But I like to remind couples, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head, okay?
Yeah.
And then number 4 is quality time, by which I mean giving them your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about the TV is off, the computer is down, we're not answering the phone, we're giving each other our full attention. And you don't have to be sitting. You can be walking down the road talking or going out to eat. And it doesn't even have to be conversation. It may be working together on a project, maybe planting a flower garden in the front yard. And your spouse wants to do this, and you're giving your full attention to them as you do it. The important thing is not the flower garden. I mean, emotionally, the important thing is you're giving your full attention to them on a project that's important to them. So quality time. And then number 5 is physical touch. We've long known the power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies. We hold them, we kiss them, we cuddle them. Long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. Now, in a marriage, we're talking about such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the whole sexual part of marriage, arm around the shoulder, driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, sitting around the house, and they walk by, you trip them. I'm kidding on the last one. Don't trip your spouse.
That's not the type of touch we're talking about.
No. We're talking about affirming touches, okay?
Yes.
So, those are the 5. And the basic idea, as we said earlier, really is that each of us has what I'm calling a primary love language. And if you don't speak their primary language, they will not feel loved, even though you're expressing love in some of the other languages. Now, that doesn't mean you don't speak the other languages, but you have to give heavy doses of the primary. You can sprinkle in the other 4 and get extra credit, okay? But they will never take the place of the primary.
No, I love it. As you were explaining those, I think I'm words of affirmation number 1, because when you looked into the camera and you're like, you were saying something really nice, I felt myself, oh, wow. I just felt myself being affirmed. And that was really awesome. And these all sound amazing, right? I mean, we all want all of these, but you talk about there's the primary one that we need more than the others. And this is obviously what you saw in the counseling room when someone, a husband or a wife, was saying, I do all of these things for them to show them love, but it wasn't their primary language. Is that correct?
Absolutely. In fact, one man said, when his wife said, I feel like he doesn't love me, he said, Dr. Chapman, he said, I wash dishes, I vacuum floors, I wash the car every Saturday, I mow the grass, I help her with the laundry, and she sits there and says she doesn't feel loved. Yeah. I look back at her and she said, Dr. Chapman, he's right. He is a hardworking man, but we don't ever talk. We haven't talked in 20 years. She said, he's always mowing the grass, washing the dishes, always doing something. Her language was quality time. Yeah. When she said talk, she didn't mean that they didn't discuss, where you want to go for dinner or who's going to pick up the kids. She meant we don't ever sit down and have an honest, good, open talk with each other. Quality time. So he was sincere, but he was missing her because he wasn't speaking her language.
Yeah. So what happens when that couple goes home and he starts to sit down with her, spend some quality time? What happens to the marriage? All of a sudden they're in the counseling room, they're having some issues with their marriage, and then now they go home and just do a couple of simple things. What happens? What are some of the results?
I think what happens is that the other person begins to feel love. You've been saying you love them, but they're beginning to feel love now. And we're talking about, look, there's many definitions of love, but what we're talking about is that deep emotional need to feel loved. And so they begin to feel love. And when they begin to feel loved, they're drawn to you because love stimulates love. The scriptures say we love God because God first loved us. See, his love stimulates our love. Well, that principle is true in human relationships. When one person, even one person, will begin to speak love in the language of the other person, it stimulates in that other person a feeling of being loved, and they're drawn to you. So you don't sit around and waiting for your spouse to start speaking your language. You get the concept and you start speaking their language, and you'll begin to see a change in them.
Yeah, definitely. You talk about in the 5 love languages, the love tank. I always thought this was an amazing chapter, and he kind of related it to a car, that if you're driving a car and your oil starts to get low, there could be some severe issues going and running that car. And it's kind of similar to the love tank. So why don't you talk to us about the love tank?
Yeah, or you could use a gasoline tank in the car. If it's full, you can drive a long ways. If it's empty or near empty, you're not going far. And so I like to picture inside of us, even children, that there's an emotional love tank. And if the love tank is full, for example, if that child genuinely feels loved by the parents, that child grows up emotionally healthy. But if that love tank is empty, that child does not feel loved, the child will grow up with many internal emotional struggles. And the teenage years, they will go looking for love, typically in all the wrong places. But I believe that adults also have a love tank. And if you're married, the person you would most like to love you is your spouse. If you feel loved by your spouse, if the love tank is full, life is beautiful. But if the love tank is empty and you feel like they don't love me, they wish they weren't married to me, life begins to look pretty dark. So what we're doing is trying to keep the love tank full, and the love language helps you do that effectively.
And obviously this started off with marriage. It's branched into many other books, and you've talked about kids, teens, the workplace. And then you also just mentioned that when you're not feeling loved, especially by your spouse, you go and you look for love in other places because we all have this need to be loved. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners, and I believe that many times they become workaholics, that they like to spend a lot of their time at work because they feel respected, which can in turn, as a man especially, loved. And when they come home, maybe they don't feel that as much. So again, maybe it doesn't always have to be in the teen years where you look for love in some of these other places, but even as adults, we all need love, right? And we're looking in various ways.
And if words is your words, affirming words is your love language, and you don't hear them from your spouse. In fact, your spouse is always being critical of you. But at work, everybody's praising you. I mean, they're expressing appreciation for you. So, man, you spend more time at work, less time at home. Not you're consciously doing it, but you're being fed emotionally in one place and you're not in the other. And of course, many times, this leads to some emotional attachment or sometimes an affair with somebody, outside the home, which is very tragic. And that's why I believe if we can get this together in our marriage, we're not going to nearly be as attracted to somebody else out there because our needs are being met in the marriage.
Yeah. Would you say, I work with a lot of men, and one of the things, the deep, dark secrets in men, and even in the Christian church, we deal with pornography. And I heard this one time that a lot of times men don't go to pornography to just for the pornography's sake, but they go to it because they're never rejected. And sometimes they feel rejected, possibly at home. Have you ever dealt, with men with this type of issue?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of issues why some men turn to pornography. But let me just say up front, pornography never, ever enhances a marriage relationship. Mm-hmm. I cannot tell you how many wives have sat in my office when they've discovered their husband's on porn and they're weeping. And they say, Dr. Chapman, what is wrong with me? Mm-hmm. Why does he have to turn to some unreal world out there? Yeah. So it's always detrimental to a marriage. I would just encourage men, just don't walk down that road. If you're walking down that road, turn around, come back in the real world, But yeah, I think there are different things that motivate men to do that. But one of them many times is that their needs are not being met in the marriage relationship. Yeah. And so rather than having a physical affair, they have a mental affair with a person that's unknown to them.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just talk about you. I want to ask you real quick. So what is your primary love language?
Words of affirmation.
Okay. We look very
and while
good
I'm
today,
at it,
Dr.
my
Gary.
wife's is acts of service. Okay, and I didn't know anything about this when we got married, but and so what I did, I gave my wife words of affirmation. I told her how nice she looked, how much I loved the meals she fixed and other things. And I probably told her a dozen times a day in those early days, I love you, honey. I am so glad I married you. And one night she said to me, you keep on saying, I love you, I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you don't ever volunteer to wash the dishes or to clean the toilet or any of those things, And my response was, well, I thought that was your job.
That was the wrong thing to say. She's probably thinking when he said, this is such a nice meal that she made, honey, she's probably like, well, why don't you make the meal sometime?
Yeah. I didn't know anything about love language, but looking back on it, she was telling me her love language. It was acts of service. I didn't get it back then. Eventually I got it.
No, that's amazing. I want to transition into, there's this term of falling in love. And I think that we've all been there. At one point in our life, we've fallen in love with someone. And I know that I've been at that point when I was dating my wife. We were falling in love and we couldn't do anything wrong. And we thought the other person was perfect. And we had kind of that feeling of just the butterflies and we couldn't get enough of them. And we were falling in love, right? And I also remember, in today's day in our culture, sometimes we use the term falling out of love. Right? It's just like, if a marriage, people get separated, eventually get divorced, and they say, well, it was because we have fallen out of love. Yeah. What do you say to all that?
Well, I think that concept of falling in love is grossly misunderstood in our culture. We have, by and large, taken that as the foundation for marriage. Don't get married unless you really love them, okay? And so we have these euphoric feelings, which you described, and we view them as just being incredibly wonderful, and we feel so good when we're around them. But what no one told me, and I wish they had, but no one told me this, the average lifespan of those euphoric feelings is 2 years. Mm. Some a little longer, some a little less, average 2 years, and we come down off that high. I was always told growing up, I had the idea that if you've got the real thing, it's going to last forever. So my wife and I had dated for a little over 2 years before we got married. I began to come down off the high in the first 6 months of our marriage. Mm. And our differences emerged. And we didn't know how to solve differences because when you're in love, you don't think you're going to have any. And we ended up arguing with each other because I knew I was right and she knew she was right. We preached to each other. And so we had a lot of arguments. And not only did I lose those positive feelings, but now I had negative feelings toward her, and I'm saying to myself, man, I've lost it. It's gone. I don't know what happened. And here's the problem in our culture is, see, people interpret that to mean, well, I've lost it. So I guess ultimately
move on,
just go look somewhere else. I just made a big mistake, and it's so tragic that they don't understand this is normal. You're going to come down off the high. I don't care how many times you get married. It's temporary. And that's why we have to understanding the love languages will help you, because if you learn each other's love language and you start speaking it, you come down off the high, you hardly miss it because you still feel loved. And so that's where these two things come together. Long-term love is intentional love. It's understanding what makes your spouse feel loved, and you're choosing to do it. And the love tank, it stays full. And you can process all of life much easier when that need is met. But if that need is not met, you end up arguing and saying hateful things to each other.
Yeah. No, definitely. And obviously with the transition into kind of talking about like real love is what you mentioned, and biblical love, like what God teaches us about love. When we're sitting up there saying our vows till death do us part, sickness and in health, a lot of people don't take that real serious, and there's going to be hard times. And that's one thing. I was reading something the other day that it talks about sometimes, life is hard. A lot of things are hard, and you can choose your hard. It talks about, being overweight is hard, but being in shape is also hard. Sometimes owning a business and being wealthy is hard, but being poor is hard. Then it gets to marriage, and it says being married is hard, being divorced is hard. So choose which hard you want to do. So my thing is like, why do you think marriage is so hard? What do you say to that?
I think primarily because we're human. And humans don't think the same way, and they don't have the same feelings. And so when we come down off that high and those differences emerge, which are always there, we weren't expecting it, and we don't know how to get to work together, work beyond that, learn how to be a team, learn how to accept some things and change other things so that we work together as a team. So I think that's what happens. And I think that's why many couples end up choosing divorce. And let me tell you, having been counseling people for 40 years, the pain of divorce and what comes after, far worse than the pain in marriage.
Yeah.
Much harder. And that's why second marriages, the divorce rate is higher than first marriages. Third marriages, even higher. The answer is not running. The answer is learning.
Yeah.
Learning how to make the marriage you now have what you want it to be. But yeah, it's you're not pushed along by those emotions, so it's hard work. Yeah. And I remember I was talking to a young gal once in an airport, and she was going to visit her fiance, and she asked me what I did. I said, well, I help people work on their marriage. And I saw this question mark in her eyes, and she said, why do you have to work on marriage? I knew she was in love. Yeah. When you're in love, you don't think you have to work on it. It's just wonderful, Yeah. But we have to choose to change some things in order to minister to each other, to serve each other. It's love. At the heart of love is an attitude of service. I'm here to enrich your life. I want to help you become the person that you believe God wants you to be. So you get that going right, you're going to be okay.
No, definitely. And that's great. I just remember when I was dating my wife, we met with some couples, and we were kind of in that same, we had the hearts in our eyes, and they're like, hey, when you reach that point where some of the cute things that each other is doing start to get annoying, then, you need to come back and revisit, some of these things that we're teaching you. And so I want to ask you this, Dr. Chapman, is there like more of a common love language that people gravitate towards, or is it really just kind of all over the board? I mean, it just kind of depends. But is there one like, hey, most people, 80% of the people are words of affirmation?
No, they actually are pretty well evenly distributed, and it's not gender specific. A man can have any one of the five. A woman can have any one of the five. but they don't vary much, 18 to 22%, so now I think a lot of men will just hear the love languages. And when they hear physical touch, they automatically say, oh, my love language is physical touch. And they're thinking about the sexual part of marriage. Right. And I say to them, well, maybe that's your love language, but let me ask you this question. Do non-sexual touches make you feel loved? And they first look at me like a deer in the headlights. Are there non-sexual touches?
What is that?
I said, okay, let's say you get out of the car, you're walking into the shopping mall, and she reaches over and holds your hand as you walk into the mall. Does that make you feel loved? And if he says, that kind of irritates me. I said, well, let me ask you this. If she's pouring you a cup of coffee and she puts her hand on your shoulder, does that make you feel loved? And if he says, not really, I said, physical touch is not your love language, okay? Now, we got the whole thing about male and female differences sexually and all of that. That's another whole topic, but don't assume that all men have physical touch as their language. That's not true.
Yeah. And I think you also said in your book that one gentleman in your office, he didn't know if physical touch was his love language or if it was words of affirmation. And you started to go over some of these scenarios and you're like, well, because he was really going after the sexual touch. And he said, if your wife has all the sex that you guys can have together, but she didn't say anything nice about you and she's kind of negative towards you, how would that make you feel? And he said, that would make me feel terrible. And he said, okay, words of affirmation.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's awesome. Well, I want to branch off because obviously we talk about marriage. You've been a marriage counselor for many years now, and you've worked with couples, but you also started to branch off. And a lot of these, you can definitely talk about these within marriage, but you've written books that have to do with love languages for kids, the 5 love languages for teens, the 5 love languages for appreciation in your workplace. So talk about that, because this is huge. You don't have to use this within your marriage. This can go beyond the borders of that.
Yeah, it's in all human relationships, close human relationships. Yeah, the book, 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, grew out of people saying to me over the years, Gary, I know you wrote that original book for married couples, but I've been using the concept at work, and it's changing the environment where I work. And I heard numerous people say that. And when Dr. Paul White came to me, my co-author of that book, he is a psychologist and has spent 20 years working with business leaders. And when he said, Gary, we've got to do this because here's what we discovered. 70% of the people who have a job in this country say they feel little to no appreciation coming from the people with whom and for whom they work. 64% of the people who leave a job and go to another job say they left primarily because they didn't feel appreciated. And so when I found out who he was and what he'd been doing, I thought I can team up with this guy. And so we did. And he would, for 2 years, he did research. He would go into a business, and we did all kinds of businesses, all the way from hair salons to construction companies. He'd give a job satisfaction test. Then he would share this concept, and all of them would take what we call the MBA inventory, Motivating by Appreciation Inventory, which would tell them their primary appreciation language at work, their secondary, and the one that's least important. So now everybody in the work group has that information on everybody else. And he would send them about every 6 weeks. He'd send a little reminder to get it back on the front burner. Did this for a year, went back at the end of the year, did another job satisfaction test. And in every case, it was statistically improved. So we're really excited about this. And that book is doing really, really well. And he's kind of carrying the freight on that because I told him when we got married, when we wrote the book, I said, listen, my passion is marriage and your passion is business. So you take it and go with it. And he did. And I've been very, very encouraged with the response to that. You see, we call it appreciation at work rather than love, but it's the same basic emotional need. At work, it's the sense that these people care about me as a person. I'm not a cog in a machine. They appreciate me as a person. And when you feel appreciated, you're going to give more of your energy to that workplace. Yeah. And if you don't feel appreciated, you just do enough to get by.
No,
so it has huge implications.
Yeah, I love that, and I've definitely been using it in our business as well. And again, like if you just know, how can you show someone appreciation? You can, if it's quality time, maybe you take them out to lunch, spend some time with them. If it's gifts, you get them a gift. If it's acts of service, you might do something for their family. But yeah, it just kind of changes the game. How you can show someone appreciation. So, what about kids? I mean, I have 4 kids. My house is pretty crazy most of the time. I have young kids too, and I'm always trying to figure out. I wonder what their love language is. So, is there like a test or something that we can really know? Because a lot of people might be asking, like, okay, well, I do like this and this, but is there something I can really know what my love languages or a kid's?
Let me start with young children. Because you can discover a young child's love language by the time they're 4 years old, maybe even earlier, but certainly by 4, by just simply observing their behavior. How do they respond to you and other people? For example, my son, his language is physical touch. When he was that age, when I came home from work, he would run to the door, grab my leg, and climb on me. He's touching me because he wants to be touched.
Yeah.
My daughter never did that. At that age, she would say, Daddy, come into my room. I want to show you something. She wanted quality time. So it's there very early in a child's life. Now, so just observing the child's behavior at that age. As they get older, of course, yes, if you go online to 5lovelanguages.com, the number 5lovelanguages.com, there's a free quiz for married couples, a free quiz for single adults, a free quiz for teenagers, and then there's a series of questions you can ask a child that will help a child that's younger than teenagers discover their language. And then so it's really easy and it's free. In fact, they told me the other day, 60 million people have taken the couples quiz.
Wow.
I told my publisher who does the website, I said, you guys should have been charging $1 a piece.
That's right. Oh, that would have been good. Yeah. That's awesome.
But yeah, all that's there at 5lovelanguages.com.
Sounds good. 5lovelanguages.com. Guys, so go check that out on the website and take the test. See what your love language is. See what your spouse's love language is. Figure out the close relationships to you as well. Before we go to the last section of the show, Dr. Chapman, just a couple other questions here. So can the love languages hurt people? So can you use it to hurt?
I think if you use the opposite of a person's love language, you hurt them deeply. For example, if words of affirmation is their primary love language, but what you give them are critical words, condemning words, it is like a dagger in the heart of that person. There's no way you could hurt them worse than to give them critical, condemning words. And people don't understand this. They're driving their spouse away when they do this. They're killing their spouse verbally. If you take physical touch and rather than affirming touches, you give abusive touches, there's nothing worse you can do to that person than that. Pushing them, shoving them, grabbing their hands, those kind of things. Absolutely incredibly horrible. If gifts is their language, or let's say a child's language, and your method of discipline is to take away a gift you gave them because they did something wrong, that's the most severe punishment you can give that child, because that says to them, they don't love me. They took my gift away.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do take any one of these and you turn it in an opposite way, and you can deeply hurt that person. Yeah. That's why it's important for parents to understand this when it comes to discipline. You don't want to take their primary language and turn it around. For example, if quality time is their primary love language and your main method of discipline is send them to their room for 30 minutes because they misbehave, put them in isolation, that's the most severe punishment you could give that child. Wow. Yeah, another child, if that's not their language, you put them in the room, they go in there and play. They don't even know they're being disciplined.
They're having fun.
So this really helps understanding, discipline of a child.
Yeah. Well, this is an amazing tool to have, guys. I've read the book. I've read many of your books, Dr. Chapman. Appreciate everything that you do. The 5lovelanguages.com. Get your book of that, whether it's your marriage, teens, kids, workplace. It's all there. And I think, Dr. Chapman, you've written, what, 50? Is it
Well,
50
it's over
something?
50. I don't know how many. It's over 50
Wow,
books. Yeah.
that's amazing, and so thank you so much for serving. Just everybody, you're such an amazing. You're a radio host, a pastor as well. Just a humble human being. I just feel that just coming from the camera here, and just thank you so much for that. I like to end every show with a little fun, and this is called, I don't know why I called it this, but it's called Coffee with Gary. So like if I was sitting down with you and I just wanted to ask you some fun questions, these are just kind of fun, and the answers on these are typically short, so maybe less than a minute long or so. But so I just have a few questions for you, Dr. Chapman. So number one, you've been extremely successful in your career, like you said. Millions of people have taken the personality test. You've sold, 15 million books in English now, which is awesome. You're pastoring a great church in North Carolina. You've authored 50 plus books. You've been New York Times best-selling list. But you remain extremely humble. And like I said, you're on this podcast, and I feel that coming through. And I always find people that are successful, sometimes a humble life can be rather difficult. So like, where do you find that from?
Well, Brett, I learned many years ago, in fact, right after college, I had a summer job, and I was assigned to run a folder, a big, huge folder. It was in a print shop. And I worked on that. I had the attitude when I finished college, I can handle anything, I worked for 4 days, all day long, trying to get that folder to work. And on Friday morning, I was having my time with God, and I came to John 15, verse 5, where Jesus said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. You hang on to me, you're going to produce a lot of fruit. But without me, you can do nothing.
Yeah.
And I wept.
Mm.
And I said, God, I can't even run a dumb folder without you. And when I got through weeping, I said, please give me the ability to run that folder. And I went in and things just clicked, and all summer long I ran that folder. I've never forgotten that lesson. We don't accomplish things simply out of our own ingenuity or our own wisdom. We don't even breathe without God. And when you understand that reality, there's not much room for pride.
Yeah.
You just accept these things as a gift from God, and you try to use the gift God has given you, for His glory. And it's pleasant for you. I mean, people ask me what I'd like to do if I retired. I said, I'd like to do what I'm doing. I love what I do. That's my perspective.
Love it. Awesome. All right, number two. So you've authored, like I said, 50 plus books, a radio show host, pastor of a church, and it sounds like you produce a lot. Like you're a very busy person. And we all have just 24 hours in a day. But I want to ask, what's your secret? Do you have a secret of how do you get so much done?
Well, I am by nature an organized person, which I think is a gift, But what I've done in terms of writing through the years is I take 1 day a week, morning and afternoon, for writing. Normally it's been on Thursday. And I say to my assistant at the church, if there's a crisis, you don't hesitate to call me and I'll be there. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I'm going to take the morning and afternoon of that day to write. And it takes a long time to write a book that way, just one day a week. But if you're just consistent, eventually, you get it done. I think just being by nature organized has been a gift of God that helps you, schedule your life. And we're all responsible for how we schedule our lives. And you can schedule too much as well. You have to learn the balance between, time to breathe. And I sometimes talk about taking mini vacations by MINI. And what that means is I might just take a walk down the hallway, walk all the way across the buildings in which I'm in, and come back. And took me 15 minutes. It was a 15-minute vacation. Okay. Now I'll talk to the next person.
I like that. That's good. Awesome. Well, all right. Number 3. So besides love, we talked about the love languages. Are there one or two other ingredients that a successful marriage needs to have, in your opinion?
Yes. I think in addition to love, we have to deal effectively with our failures. And the reason I say this, and that involves apologizing and forgiving. And the reason I say that this is essential is because none of us are perfect. Mm. One man did raise his hand when the speaker said, does anyone know of a perfect husband? He raised his hand. He said, my wife's first husband. Well, my observation is if there are any perfect husbands, they are deceased. And most of them got perfect after they died. Right. Okay. None of us are perfect. You don't have to be perfect to have a good marriage, but you do have to deal with your failures. So we have to learn how to apologize, and we have to choose to forgive. And I wrote a whole book on apology. The title of that book is When Sorry Isn't Enough. Wow. In fact, we're redoing that now, and the new title is going to be, when it comes back out, it's going to be the 5 apology languages. Wow. But learning how to apologize in a way that communicates your sincerity to the other person, and then choosing to forgive. If you do that, you keep emotional walls from being built between the two of you. Yeah. If you don't deal with them, you do build a wall between you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a hard thing to do. That's a humbling spirit, just to sit down and apologize to your spouse. Amazing. All right, last one, Gary. So you've inspired so many with your books. Like I said, it's a household name, the 5 Love Languages, here at the Snodgrass House. But who's inspired you?
Well, there have been significant people in my life. One was Jim Merck. I lived in his house, he and his wife's house, with their 5 children, my senior year in college. And he was with Navigators, a group called the Navigators, a Christian group. And he spent time with the 4 of us guys who lived in one room upstairs, 4 bunk beds. He took time with us individually every week, and we met as a group every week. And they integrated us into their family and let us wash dishes and wash cars. And I just saw how a family works, even though his kids were little and we were, of course, in college. But Jim Merck and his wife, Donna, had a tremendous influence on my life. And there have been other people in different areas of my life, who had an influence on me. And I just released my memoirs, and I talk about some of the impacts on my life. I think the title of the memoirs is, I think I can remember it, Life Lessons and Love Languages. And the subtitle is What I Learned on My Unexpected Journey. And I look at my childhood and my educational journey and my marriage and my children and my vocation, and how all of them impacted me. And at different places, I learned different things, from each of these groups of people.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you to that family, the Mercks, for showing you and inspiring you. I think that's what we're called to do. You just never know when you're going to touch somebody during their season of life, and they go on. And sometimes it's about, reaching out and serving people. And thank you so much for being on the show today, Dr. Gary Chapman. I appreciate you. I'm definitely going to get your memoirs book. And guys, check out the 5lovelanguages.com. Check out all of Dr. Gary Chapman's books. We appreciate you. And God bless you, Dr. Gary Chapman. I thank you.
Well, thank you, Brett. I enjoyed being with you. And keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.
Thank you so much for checking out the Brett Snodgrass channel. If you like this video, please slam on that like button. And if you really like it, then subscribe to our channel here. And remember to leave us a comment below, and I'm going to try my hardest to reply to all the comments. Thank you guys so much. This is why I do what I do. Every single week, I come out with content that focuses on success, freedom, and living out your purpose. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.